when you think of stress in this population, you need to use a broad lens. The brain and body don't practice Cartesian dualism. Stress of all types activates the stress system and its components, including the brain stress systems, which then in turn modulate aberrant changes in neural network function, the changes we see in FND. Let's consider the types of stress that we can see in clinical practice. There's physical stress, relational stress, there's psychological stress secondary to illness promoting psychological processes. There's academic stress. And really what constitutes a good solid challenge for one child may be overwhelming for another child. The child manages one stressor, the child manages another stressor, the child begins to develop somatic symptoms, signaling activation of the stress system. The child eventually breaks down, presents with FND following a stressor, and the triggering event can be relatively small. The child with FND experiences stress after stress after stress. The stress exceeds the child's capacity to cope. At each time point, the stress activates the stress systems in the body and brain. Repeatedly, various components of the stress system are sensitized. Stress causes HPA activation and increase in glucocorticoids, cortisol secretion. Glucocorticoids increase capacity for energy use in the short term, but they also facilitate epigenetic changes. So they allow life experiences to be biologically embedded to change brain and body function. The findings of attenuated or reverse CAR in our kids suggest a picture of chronic stress. Stress also causes the autonomic nervous system to activate, and this system stays overactivated in kids with FND. Eventually, a stressful event, often minor, activates the child's stress system, including glial cells in the brain, which hold immunological memory for past physical and psychological stress. The response to the stressor is excessive, amplified by past priming, aberrant neural network changes are triggered, and FND symptoms emerge. Now, the focus of attention is on the child's symptoms because they are severe and because they impair the child's function. And a key point here is that attention amplifies FND symptoms. So, for example, a functional tremor amplifies when the child pays attention to the tremor and decreases if the child is distracted. Symptoms amplify when the parent attends to them or asks about them constantly. What this means for treatment is that the clinician will need to focus on managing the focus of attention away from the symptoms in every component of the intervention. Ward rounds, psychotherapy, physiotherapy, attending school, the family intervention, and so on. And of course, the neurologist uses this feature of FND to obtain a positive diagnosis of FND. By asking the child to shift attention, the neurologist notes that the symptom severity fluctuates. Another key point relates to the art of medicine is about the language you use. The terminology is important. Use child-friendly language that does not offend. If you use the word psychogenic in your conversations with children and families, as in psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, the child will assume that you're saying they're psycho. Don't use psychogenic. Just use functional seizures or non-epileptic seizures, or use stress-related seizures. Likewise, if you use the term behavioral, the child will assume you're saying that they're doing it on purpose, that they're naughty, as it were. And if you use pseudo seizures, the child will assume that you're saying that she's faking it. And if you use psychological, the child will assume that you mean it's all in her head. And then here is the commonly seen pitfall, the assumption that the child has been sexually abused, and the family are right to be indignant and angry. Sexual abuse does occur, but it isn't very common. It's the exception. And you can see that in the sort of numbers. Maltreatment is right down the bottom of the diagram. And this slide is here to remind you that the medical process of being diagnosed can be stressful in itself. And it's particularly stressful if the paediatrician fails to promptly make a clear positive diagnosis based on clinical examination and any necessary tests. And this story is here to remind you that some children are traumatized by their experience in the medical system.